In the movie Blue Moon about Larry Hart, and he also stars in the streaming series The Lowdown. We'll be right back. This is Fresh Air.
Supporting WHYY, Rutgers Camden Theater presents Way Down the Silk Trumpet, a musical dedicated to the history of African American recording artists at Victor Records in Camden in the 20s and 30s, and featuring performances of classic blues, jazz, and gospel music. February 6th to the 15th in the Gordon Theater on the Rutgers Camden campus. More information and tickets at camden.rutgers.edu.
Our federal system of checks and balances has become unbalanced. Through gerrymandering, through campaign finance, through some of the voting rights decisions, Congress no longer has the ability to respond as directly to the people. And because of that, the court has taken away what is probably Congress's most important basis of authority.
What Congress can do about that, that's next time on Think. Tonight at 9 on WHYY. This is Fresh Air. Let's get back to my interview with Ethan Hawke. He's just been nominated for an Oscar for Best Actor for his starring role playing lyricist Larry Hart in the film Blue Moon. You've done several movies about music. You have a new documentary that hasn't come out yet about Merle Haggard. You did a documentary about the pianist Seymour Bernstein. You played Chet Baker in a theatrical film.
I made the film Blaze.
Yes, about Blaze Foley.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when did you become really interested in music, and were you ever in a band?
I don't remember life without music. My father was a great pianist. And,
What kind of music does he play?
Well, when I was little, he used to play Scott Joplin, and I loved to lay under the piano and listen to him play these rags. And I don't know why, but I go to, put on a good record, and everything is fine. Everything's going to be okay. I also think that I love acting. Acting is my job, and to understand acting, I've gotten into directing, and to understand acting, I've gotten into writing. But music's one thing I can't really do. I try, but I'm not good at it at all. I love it, and my inability to do it well has only increased my fandom and my worship of the people who can do it. And I think I really love being a fan.
Why did Merle Haggard make such a good subject for a documentary?
Well, it was coming up on the last presidential election, and I had this realization that no matter who won, half the country was going to be absolutely despondent. And I found myself thinking a lot about Merle Haggard and how much he crossed the boundaries between left and right, and what a free thinker he was. And he spent the first 9 years of his professional stardom as Woody Guthrie. And then he wrote this funny song called Okie from Muskogee. It was basically a really, really funny song, asking the left wing to consider how the right wing might feel. And the left wing responded with absolute vehemence and felt betrayed and were angry at him. And then he was claimed by Nixon and touted as the, voice of the silent majority. And then he went on and wrote songs about civil rights that weren't released and promoted because the label weren't excited by that, or they were worried he was going to lose fans. And he wrote pro-immigration songs, and those were ignored. And then slowly the right wing lost interest in him as their spokesperson. And he just was always himself, and he didn't follow anyone else's bandwagon. And he was a humanist. And I thought he might be a great person to revisit right now as our country is so kind of team-oriented and not speaking to each other. And that was the pull.
So,
not to mention he's a genius songwriter, and he's one of the great American songwriters. And I feel that his star has been receding in popular culture, and I kind of wanted to remind everybody about what a legend he was.
well, we should end with some music. Do you have a preference?
Why don't you pick your favorite version of My Funny Valentine.
Chet Baker.
Let's do Chet.
Very good. Always happy to do that. Ethan Hawke, it's just been great to talk with you. Thank you so much. And again, congratulations on all the work you've been doing.
Thanks.
So many good things.
I'm tired after all the questions you asked me. I love your show, and I love NPR, and I really appreciate what you guys do, and I'm just thrilled to be on your program. So thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for saying that. It's so great to have you. Ethan Hawke is nominated for an Oscar for his starring role as lyricist Larry Hart in the film Blue Moon. He also starred in the FX streaming series The Lowdown, which has been renewed for a second season. Our interview was recorded in November. My funny... Story inside the Murdoch media empire, which includes Fox News and the Wall Street Journal. We'll talk with journalist Gabe Sherman. He's covered the Murdochs for nearly 2 decades and has a new book about the succession fight, the outcome, how it broke the family, and its impact on the world. I hope you'll join us. Fresh Air's executive producers are Danny Miller and Sam Brigger. Our technical director and engineer is Audrey Bentham, with additional engineering today from Diana Martinez. Our interviews and reviews are produced and edited by Phyllis Myers, Henry Baldonado, Lauren Krenzel, Teresa Madden, Monique Nazareth, Thea Challoner, Susan Yakundi, Anna Bauman, and Nico Gonzalez Whistler. Our digital media producer is Molly C.V. Nesper. Roberta Shorrock directs the show. Our co-host is Tanya Mosley. I'm Terry Gross.
From this station and from FJC, a foundation of donor-advised funds working to maximize the impact of charitable giving and to create customized philanthropic solutions. Learn more at fjc.org. And from the George Lucas Educational Foundation, creator of Edutopia, for 35 years, sharing what works in schools today and working to inspire new ways to learn tomorrow. More at edutopia.org.
Sometimes the best New Year's resolution is to keep a healthy habit going strong. So keep joining us weekday mornings for Morning Edition from NPR News.
Weekday mornings from 5 to 10 on WHYY. Under a minute to go before 4 o'clock at WHYY. Matt Gillen with you on a Monday afternoon. All Things Considered is up next for us. We'll begin the 4 o'clock hour with news headlines from NPR and the newsroom at WHYY. Taking a look at Wall Street just before the close, things are in positive territory today. The S&P 500 up by about 0.5%, the Dow up by more than 1%, and the NASDAQ up by slightly more than 0.5%.
This is WHYY-FM Philadelphia, WNJM Manahawkin, WNJN-FM Atlantic City, WNJZ Cape May Courthouse, streaming on the WHYY app and at WHYY.org.
It seems like what they're actually doing is trying to find a way to revoke their refugee status.
How the Trump administration's immigration crackdown in Minneapolis has swept up refugees who are legally in the United States.
For Monday, February 2nd, this is All Things Considered from NPR News.
I'm Scott Detrow.
And I'm Juana Summers. Ahead, we'll hear about others who have also been mistakenly marked for deportation.
The government has really tried to use this case to make the point that they can do whatever they want, whenever they want, to whomever they want.
And as the Department of Justice releases what may be the final batch of Epstein files, we'll talk to a woman who testified against him in court.
Annie Farmer says she can't understand why so many victims' personal information was made public.
I'm feeling really upset. It feels like weaponized incompetence.
Those stories and others coming up after this newscast.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Kristen Wright. Lawmakers are divided on how to end the partial government shutdown. There's continued disagreement over federal immigration enforcement operations. The Trump administration can continue those immigration enforcement operations and the surge in Minneapolis after a ruling from a federal judge over the weekend. That's as Border Czar Tom Homan said there are plans to draw down the federal government's presence there. But many people in Minneapolis say they don't feel any change, as NPR's Kat Lonsdorf reports.
U.S. District Judge Kate Menendez denied the state's request for an immediate halt to the federal military-style operation in the city, which has been going on for nearly 2 months, while at the same time acknowledging the tremendous strain it has put on the people of Minnesota. On the same day, a different judge in Texas issued a scathing order to release 5-year-old Liam Conejo Ramos and his father, Adrian Conejo Arias, from federal detention. Liam was detained in a Minneapolis suburb last month, wearing a fluffy blue bunny hat and Spider-Man backpack after coming home from school. Pictures of that incident spurred outrage across the country. The two are now back in Minnesota. Kat Lonsdorf, NPR News, Minneapolis.
President Trump has announced a new trade deal with India. NPR's Deepa Shivaram says Trump and Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke by phone.
Trump has been critical of India in recent months for buying oil from Russia and has been threatening higher tariffs. Now, Trump says Modi has agreed to stop buying oil from Russia and instead buy more from the U.S. and possibly from Venezuela. Last year, Trump placed a 25% tariff on countries buying oil from Venezuela. But now the administration says India can resume those purchases to replace imports of Russian oil. Trump claims that this move will help end the war in Ukraine, which is about to reach the end of its 4th year. The new trade deal with India will include a lower tariff down to 18% from 25%. Trump says India will remove their tariffs against the U.S. altogether. Deepa Shivaram, NPR News.
The mother of Today Show host Savannah Guthrie is missing. Ellen Boyd has more from Tucson.
Family reported Nancy Guthrie missing from her Tucson home over the weekend. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos says it's being investigated as a possible crime. Relatives last saw Guthrie Saturday night. A 911 call reporting her missing came in around noon Sunday, prompting a large-scale search. Nanos provided updates at a press conference this morning.
Nancy Guthrie is of great sound mind. This is not a dementia-related. She is as sharp as a tack. The family wants everybody to know this isn't somebody who just wandered off.
Nanos was tight-lipped on the state of Guthrie's home, but said it was concerning enough for criminal investigators to assist. For NPR News, I'm L.M. Boyd in Tucson.
This is NPR.
At 4:04 in Philadelphia with WHYY News, I'm Matt Gillen. Lawmakers in Delaware want to protect residents as data centers threaten a surge in electricity rates. WHYY's Zoe Reed reports new legislation comes as a mega data center is being proposed for Delaware City.
Lawmakers advanced legislation to require large electricity users like data centers to pay a higher rate. Demand for data centers is on the rise because of the acceleration of artificial intelligence. But the facilities use a significant amount of energy. State Representative Frank Burns is the bill's sponsor. The Democrat says the goal is to prevent higher electricity costs from being passed down to residents.
I can't tell you for sure that if we just let this industry go forward, that it will triple everyone's electric bill, but I certainly can't tell you that it won't. And I just want to make sure that our ratepayers are protected.
Some Republicans say they worry the legislation would drive businesses out of the state. The legislation will now get a chance to be heard on the House floor. Zoe Reed, WHYY News.
Prolonged freezing temperatures have resulted in multiple water main breaks over the past few days throughout Philly. Water gushed down Oakdale Street in North Philadelphia after a pipe broke on Saturday. A bundled up Dominique Cooper told our news partner 6ABC the incident was making life difficult.
For the last 24 hours, we've been in the house with no water, no heat. It's freezing. The way I'm dressed now is how I'm dressed inside my house.
Others nearby had several feet of flooding in their basements. The National Weather Service expects temperatures to hover around freezing this afternoon and finally get above 32 degrees tomorrow. However, temperatures are set to plunge again over the weekend. Right now, 30 degrees and clear skies in Philadelphia. Overnight, temperatures drop down into the teens. Looking ahead to tomorrow, we are expected to finally crack freezing. Then we're in the upper 20s for the rest of the week. Down, though, on the weekends. Looks like that things have changed a bit, but we will be in the low 20s by Sunday. It's WHYY.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Imaginable Futures, envisioning a future where learning sparks opportunity and thriving belongs to everyone. Learn more at imaginablefutures.com. And the listeners who support this NPR station.
It's All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Scott Detrow.
And I'm Juana Summers. President Trump says his immigration crackdown in Minnesota targets, quote, vicious, horrible criminals. But the administration has also arrested more than 100 refugees as part of a larger plan to review refugee cases for potential fraud. The refugees caught up in the sweeps are people who lawfully entered the United States because they fled persecution. NPR's Jennifer Ludden has the story.
Early morning 3 weeks ago, JJ says ICE agents started knocking on his family's front door. He shows me how. Inside their small apartment, his wife panicked. They grabbed documents to show they and their 4 children are lawful refugees from Venezuela. But one of the officers said there was an issue.
Ellos me dijeron que ellos nada más iban a verificar las huellas, que no había ningún problema, que no lo iban a detener.
They told me they just needed to verify the fingerprints for our oldest son, but he would not be detained, he says. The family has asked that we use only their initials for fear of retaliation from immigration agents. JJ and his wife, A, were confused, but opened the door. And then they watched as their 20-year-old son was, in fact, arrested.
Cuando veo que le están poniendo las esposas, me dio mucho miedo.
When I saw him being handcuffed, I felt so scared, A says. They had guns with their fingers on the trigger. Their daughter reported on her phone as her brother was put in the backseat of a black SUV. A passing car honks in protest as the officers drive off. Last month, Homeland Security announced it was re-examining thousands of recent refugee cases to root out fraud. That's been a big focus since a massive benefits scandal in Minnesota. It involved Somali Americans who'd come as refugees. But Jane Grotman, who resettles refugees with the International Institute of Minnesota, says they are probably the most vetted immigrants.
You know, the FBI's already checked them. The Immigration Services already checked them. They've been biometric screenings.
A class action lawsuit says DHS has seized refugees without a warrant and flown many to a detention center in Texas. Grotman says they've also been released there.
Most of the people that we're hearing about are being let out in the streets in Texas, and they have no money, no documents, no way to get home.
She says one man's employer drove to Texas to bring him back to Minnesota. A federal judge has ordered the refugees released and granted a temporary pause while the lawsuit plays out. The Department of Homeland Security did not answer NPR's questions about why people have been sent to Texas and whether agents have found fraud. But it said in a statement that, quote, Minnesota is ground zero for the war on fraud.
It seems like what they're actually doing is trying to find a way to revoke their refugee status.
Immigration attorney Luke Swerdolski represents a single mother who was detained first in Texas, then Minnesota. She did not have the diabetes medication she takes twice a day, and she was grilled for nearly 7 hours, essentially relitigating her entire refugee case. Swerdolski says DHS is relying on an arcane statute to detain people, but with no semblance of fraud in his client's case, she was approved for a green card.
I ultimately think the goal is cruelty, and somebody pouring through the statutes came across this, saw it as an avenue, and decided to make it a practice.
Y me dejaron salir el jueves como a las 7 de la noche. No me dijeron nada.
Back in the Venezuelan family's apartment, their son says he was held for 3 days in Minnesota and not told why he was arrested or why he was released. His dad sits next to him on the couch.
Era demasiado bonito Minneapolis. Nosotros aquí esperamos como tener tranquilidad.
Minneapolis was beautiful. We expected a peaceful life here, he says. But now, this traumatic ordeal and the whole immigration crackdown reminds them of what they fled.
Allá en Venezuela los colectivos son así, pues tienen una capucha y solamente le ves sus ojos.
In Venezuela, pro-government paramilitary groups cover their faces and have the same attitude as the agents here, A says. They would kidnap young men my son's age, and some never returned. Now, she says, she has relived that same fear in the U.S. Jennifer Lutton, NPR News, Minneapolis.
This piece was produced by NPR's Marisa Piñolosa.
Ye, the artist once known as Kanye West, is apologizing for his behavior, and no, not for the first time. He recently took out a full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal, and he said he regrets and is deeply mortified by his anti-Semitic behavior. He said, quote, I lost touch with reality, and he attributed that to bipolar disorder, a mental health condition that causes extreme mood swings and in some cases can be associated with psychotic breaks. The music journalist Kiana Fitzgerald has been open about her own experience with bipolar disorder, which is one reason why she has paid close attention to all of this, and she is with us today. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So you wrote an open letter to Ye for the site Consequence. Let me ask directly, what was your reaction when you first saw this ad?
Surprised. I wasn't expecting him to apologize for anything because he has taken back apologies in the past. So I was just kind of like, this is interesting. It made me feel, optimistic because I live with bipolar type 1 as this conversation is about. So it's easy for me to see the inner workings of what he's been through, and it makes me want to root for him, but ultimately there's so much damage that is left in his wake.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the timing of this. I want to talk about your optimism and skepticism in a moment. First, let me read part of what Ye wrote. He wrote, the scariest thing about this disorder is how persuasive it is when it tells you you don't need help. It makes you blind, but convinced you have insight. You feel powerful, certain, and unstoppable. Does that description ring true to your own experience?
Absolutely. I'm someone that had 5.5-ish episodes that have landed me in hospitals since 2016. And I have experienced the entire gamut of symptoms with bipolar type 1. I've been psychotic, and I have experienced, mania in the most intense and immense sense of feeling like you're surrounded by love and kindness and all of these wonderful qualities, but it's not coming out of you in that way. You're coming out as irritable, you're coming out as uninformed. So there are so many experiences within mania that seem to be one way when you're within it, but looking from the outside, it looks a completely different way.
What did you make of his direct appeal to the Black community in this open letter where he writes, it's unquestionably the foundation of who I am. I am so sorry to have let you down. I love us.
Yeah, I mean, it's appreciated, but ultimately, I personally can't speak on behalf of the whole Black community. I don't think anyone can, including him. But we all want to
it back. You know, we miss the old Kanye. You know, like everybody, of course, would love to be able to listen to his music again without feeling some type of way. Do I think that the community is ready to come back around? I don't know. I know I'm seeing a lot of conversation just in my own spheres on social media, and I'm seeing people say no thank you, but that doesn't mean that that's the only thing that's happening in this conversation.
You wrote and you noted with a little bit of skepticism that the last few attempts to apologize have tended to come right around the time that new albums came out. Given that, what type of action would you want to see in the coming months to make you think, okay, maybe this is sincere, or more sincere than I thought?
I would want to see Ye engage in conversations with mental health professionals in public spaces. I would want to see him engage in conversations with other people who live with mental health conditions such as bipolar, especially bipolar type 1. I've been writing about Kanye and his mental health since 2018 when he revealed his diagnosis initially. And I have said multiple times he could change the way that we talk about mental health and mental illness. So that's what I want him to do. I want him to actually start the conversation, continue the conversation, and then make benefits of the conversation after he's done talking.
That is Kiana Fitzgerald. Her commentary is on the site Consequence. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Gaza's key border crossing with Egypt opened briefly today for the first time in a year. Only a handful of Palestinians were allowed to leave. Reopening the Rafah crossing is an important but small step in a massive undertaking to rebuild Gaza. The Trump administration has big plans for the future, but as NPR's Michelle Kellerman reports, a top UN official wants to focus on the near term.
As head of the United Nations Office for Project Services, UNOPS, George Morea da Silva travels to many war zones, but what he saw on his most recent trip to Gaza shocked him.
There is nothing standing in Gaza. It's basically rubble and tents.
And Palestinians living in those tents are burning plastic to make fuel to keep warm.
The smell of pollution in Gaza, it's something that is, I can't describe it.
He says this will have long-term impacts on the health and environment in Gaza and requires a simple fix from Israel to allow the UN to bring in more fuel.
There is nothing else to power Gaza except fuel, because solar panels are all gone. The transmission lines were cut. The power plant has stopped. So fuel is the only way to get some hospitals functioning, the bakeries functioning, the sewage functioning, the desalination facility functioning.
The UN Ops chief says he needs to get his engineers into Gaza to see what buildings are salvageable, and he needs Israel to allow in heavy equipment to clear an unprecedented amount of rubble, where there's still human remains, unexploded ordnance, and asbestos.
61 million tons of rubble, the equivalent of 30 tons per person in Gaza.
The Trump administration has unveiled flashy proposals of what Gaza could look like in the future with high-rises along the Mediterranean Sea, but Morea da Silva says there's a disconnect in those international conversations.
I've seen conversations about these big buildings and the reconstruction. Of course, this is interesting for the future, and I'm not excluding that conversation at all, but I'm saying, can we do something now? Because I don't forget the people I saw and the children I saw, and they can't wait a year or 6 months.
He's trying to get the world focused on the early recovery period, which he says will cost millions, not billions. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, Washington.
You're listening to All Things Considered from NPR News.
The Fed has recently taken over the headlines as the president publicly attacks its chair. But how did we get here?
Politics in general has become more and more of sort of a spectacle and even a zone of entertainment for many.
I'm Kimberly Adams. A look into the history of the Fed next time on Marketplace.
Marketplace is coming up this evening at 6:30 on your NPR station WHYY.
Support for for WHYY comes from the Philadelphia Art Museum and its exhibition Dream World, Surrealism at 100, marking a century of the influential art movement. Featuring works that shaped visual culture in the 20th century and beyond, Dream World Surrealism at 100 is now in its final weeks and on view through February 16th. Tickets and information are available at visitpham.org. That's visitpham.org.
You're listening to member-supported WHYY. Matt Gillen with you on a Monday afternoon for All Things Considered. Coming up, as the program continues, the Trump administration deported Kilmar Abrego Garcia to El Salvador last year. They later admitted to making a mistake with that.
There are errors when things are moving too fast. And things moving too fast is really where we've seen this administration lean in.
However, Abrego Garcia wasn't the first to be wrongfully deported. We'll have more on that coming up in about 15 minutes as All Things Considered continues here on WHYY. Time now, 4:20.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Charles Schwab, offering investors choices like full-service wealth management, advice, investing, and trading on Thinkorswim. Learn more at schwab.com. From BritBox, dedicated to offering viewers the opportunity to see it differently with British TV. Streaming original series, Jane Austen dramas, Agatha Christie mysteries, and more at BritBox.com. And from the sustaining members of this NPR station.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Juana Summers.
And I'm Scott Detrow. Annie Farmer is one of many people who testified in court about Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. She says they sexually abused her when she was 16 years old, and she's also been a leading voice in calling the Department of Justice to release all records related to Jeffrey Epstein. Now, the DOJ has made what may be its final public disclosure of documents in the case, including unredacted pictures of nude women, or possibly girls, as well as the names of victims. DOJ spokesperson told the New York Times the department was addressing victim concerns and making additional redactions. And with all this in mind, we wanted to hear from Annie Farmer again. Welcome back to All Things Considered.
Thanks for having me.
You've been vocal about wanting all the documents released. Your sister Maria was one of the first whistleblowers in this case. She made a complaint to the FBI way back in 1996. It's a complaint that went unacknowledged and uninvestigated for decades. I'm wondering, how does this latest, maybe final release make you feel?
I'm feeling really upset. This weekend, as I was sorting through files and people were sending me things, just became aware of how many violations of the law there were in terms of victims' names coming out. As you mentioned, nude photos of girls or young women. It's really disgusting.
Look, on one hand, there's pressure to get these documents public, and at the same time, the law made it clear files needed to be fully redacted, and that didn't happen. The names and images should never have been released. What do you make of that?
Honestly, at this point, it's hard not to wonder if this is intentional in some way. It feels like weaponized incompetence. If you see some of these documents where there will be a list of 50 names and one is redacted, there's just no explanation for how it could have been done so poorly. They've had victims' names for a very long time. I don't think this is just about rushing to get this information out. It feels like they want us to give up on transparency, and it's extremely problematic how they've gone about doing this.
I mean, the internet is such a weaponized place at this point. Have you had conversations with other people who have been in your position, who have been vocal about this, about what to do at this point when names and pictures are being circulated?
I think a lot of people are feeling a bit at a loss of, how to best proceed, because it is beyond what any of us had worried about. But what I do feel clear about is the fact that we still believe transparency is important, and we're not giving up on demanding that the law be followed.
What we're talking about right now is a huge concern. In the bigger picture, in terms of the information released, the new revelations in this trove, What to you was the value of this? Do you think anything important has been learned? Do you think anything important has been underscored in terms of the scope of what went on?
Yes, I think a couple things. One, that victims have been speaking out for a long time and have been, naming names, and that, there's clear evidence of very consistent reports over time, but what is not clear is what was done to investigate. I think we see that there was a very strong case in 2006 that was, the feds were trying to put together, and obviously with that sweetheart deal, it didn't unfold the way anyone believes it should have. But even after that, you can see records of people sharing information, and that nothing was done for so long, I think is extremely problematic. And you also see just how deep ties were that Epstein had to people in positions of power, wealthy people in government. You can just see clearly how that web of power protected him.
Given all this, what is your response to Department of Justice officials saying that additional charges for anyone are unlikely at this point?
I think that it is really disturbing to know that, for example, you can see Virginia Roberts Giuffre was providing detailed information about the scope of these crimes in 2011. There's depositions that include names of other individuals that she reported. So when they say, the information's not there to pursue charges, I would say, what did you do with this information? Where's the evidence of the investigation that shows charges are not warranted? That, I think, is not clear. It's very hard, with so many files and them being so disorganized, to see the trail of, what was done to follow up on things. But so far, I think we have a lot more questions about why.
You talked to Morning Edition about this last summer, and you told my colleague Layla Fadel something that I wanted to ask you again about. You said that the evolution of this story, your story in public, has left you feeling out of control, like you're not being considered or included. And I'm wondering, has that feeling changed or evolved at all for you over the past 6 months?
I think there have been times when personally I have felt a lot of agency in being able to highlight these, crimes, to explain them to others, and to highlight the negligence of the government, right? But I think, a moment like this, again, my own personal information, being date of birth, phone number, things like that leaking out certainly makes me feel out of control. But I really feel so much worse for those. I had a decision to come forward, and I know there's so many, for lots of good reasons, that chose not to come forward. And I feel really sick to my stomach just thinking about the fact that because of the way this was handled, they feel so out of control right now. Yeah. And in some cases, may feel very unsafe because of their circumstances. And so I'm just really thinking about those women now.
You're a licensed therapist.
Yes.
I'm wondering how your training has helped you navigate all of this.
Well, I think it's been really crucial for me in being able to sort of put into perspective my own reactions to some of this. There's so many levels of trauma in this story, and it's certainly not just what happened, initially with Epstein and Maxwell. It's really understanding that what's happened with these institutions, it can be just as traumatizing, if not more traumatizing. And so having those conversations, I think amongst survivors, being able to draw on that and bring, some of that information and normalize that, I think has been very helpful.
Given your professional background, given your personal experience in this, I'm wondering what your advice is to other survivors in your situation as this all plays out in a very public way.
I think that it's really important for people to understand that, there is a difference between healing and justice, in the sense of, what can come from, the government or from our justice system, right? That really healing oftentimes is about finding your places where you feel safe, and oftentimes that's in community with others. And so knowing that, there are people that want to support you if you've been through this, being able to name it and speak it and find your people is such an important step towards finding the healing that you deserve.